Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. Now, we have some good news from Rome, in my opinion. This is probably the best thing that has happened in the last several months, certainly in 2012. We have a new pope who is an enemy of the International Monetary Fund, an enemy of the World Bank. He's against neoliberal economics. He's against globalization. He is, above all, against killer austerity. An enemy of killer austerity sits on the throne of St. Peter's. And believe you me, the Anglo-Americans are foaming. They're not happy. The venom is pouring out. They didn't get Dolan. They didn't get O'Malley. They wanted a CIA pope. They wanted an IMF stooge, an agent of the British or something like this, and they didn't get it. So this has now opened some new possibilities around the world just when we needed it. And boy, do we need it. This has also got some possibilities for international reconciliation and world peace. And we'll have a detailed report about the venom of the neoliberals, the venom of Michael Moore, the stooges who now show their true colors, right? The foundation-funded shills who now come out and earn their pay, like Michael Moore, with falsifications and slanders. So, here's our current situation, though. We need all the help we can get. Fascism is on the march in Michigan. And this is now the Little Hitler Law, invoked by Snyder against the city of Detroit. It is a cold coup. It is creeping fascism. Let me put it in historical perspective before we get into the details. Fascism does not come all at once. Fascism, the seizure of power by fascism, is a process. You want to go back to Mussolini, the March on Rome, 1922, yeah. But that's preceded by the creation of a fascist regime in a single city. It is the city of Fiume. I've written about it. You can find a reprint of one of my articles about that in Obama, the Postmodern Coup. It was created by Gabriele D'Annunzio, whose 150th birthday was just last week. D'Annunzio, the poetaster, created a fascist regime in Fiume in 1919, and then that model spread. In the case of National Socialism, the Nazi coup in Germany, it was, of course, in Prussia that a Nazi coup occurred. This is actually pre-Nazi. A quasi-fascist coup was carried out by Chancellor von Papen in the summer of 1932, the famous July 1932 coup in Prussia, which kicked out the elected but caretaker social democratic government and put in essentially dictatorial rule. So this is what we now have. In Michigan, it's Flint, Pontiac, Benton Harbor, Ecorse, the Detroit school system, and now, as of yesterday, the city of Detroit. I wonder why Michael Moore didn't spend more time doing something about Flint and protesting fascism in his hometown rather than going out and slandering a religious leader because he's against the International Monetary Fund and he doesn't meet Michael Moore's sexual delicatessen of what can we say, politically correct preferences. So now this is Governor Snyder. We'll remember the little Hitler law has actually already been overturned. Snyder imposed the Little Hitler law back more than 2 years ago now, and it was on the Michigan ballot in November of last year, and it was voted down. So in reality, the Little Hitler law should not be there anymore. It should not be possible for Snyder to appoint a commissar, a dictator, a bankruptcy administrator to go into Detroit and essentially wreck the city, to break contracts with unions, to deprive retirees of their pensions, to deprive retirees of their health care, to cut wages, more brutal cuts in services in Detroit. And, of course, the selling off of potentially very valuable public property to rich cronies. That's what we're going to have in the city of Detroit, right? 700,000 people are still there. It's about half what it used to be. It used to be 1.5 million, half a century ago. And it's gone downhill. And don't tell me it went downhill because of the unions. It went downhill because of people we know, right? Roger Smith, the people over the years, the Wall Street puppets who used General Motors and Ford and Chrysler as a cash cow to loot those companies and keep up shareholder value, as they say, so that the tax returns went down. And we'll look at some analysis coming out of various groups in struggle in the city of Detroit. So as of yesterday, the new dictator for Detroit is Kevyn Orr, O-R-R. He is from the law firm of Jones Day. He gets paid $275,000 to be the dictator. The official statistics are that Detroit has a deficit of $300 million and a total debt of about $14 billion. However, the $14 billion is the usual inflated figure. It reflects future liabilities, right? Unpaid liabilities. But this is what the Republicans always do. They say, let's look ahead 100 years and see everything you're going to have to pay in 100 years, and then we'll dish that up as a figure today to scare people. So Kevyn Orr, his previous expertise is the looting of Chrysler, busting union contracts, gouging wages, chiseling benefits, and so forth. So now we've got the mayor. This was a sad scene. The poor mayor of Detroit, Mayor Dave Bing, pathetically coming out, standing next to Snyder, the fascist capo, and this Kevyn Orr, the dictator now of Detroit, and saying that he's glad to be working together with this team. And it's a sad, sad day for the United States. Ken Cockerell of the City Council also sadly complaining a little bit more, but ultimately not any resistance from there. The city is now in receivership. The language used by Snyder is completely Orwellian. It is the rhetoric that you hear. Let's all come together. Let's work together. Let's have teamwork. Let's cooperate, and so forth. This is a city that has been looted for decades, and they have been looted most recently, of course, by the reactionary Republicans, and these are extreme Tea Party lunatics in the city of the capital, of course, of Lansing, right, in the state legislature. The entity which actually technically controls Detroit is the Michigan Loan Board. And we can remember here in Washington, D.C., when we had a financial control board. Baltimore's been through the ringer, Pittsburgh. And, of course, going back to 1975, we had Big Mac, Municipal Assistance Corporation. You remember the famous headline, Ford to City, drop dead. In this case, we want to know where Obama is. We want to hear from Obama. We want to hear from, of course, we want to hear from Michael Moore. We want to hear from all the people who supposedly care about this. We wonder where Occupy Wall Street, where are you? To resist. And the 14th Amendment says no state shall deprive anybody of life, liberty, property without due process of law. Obama, do something. It's happening in Detroit right now. We'll be back in a minute. Radio, we're calling for mass mobilization to fight the fascist coup that's creeping through the state of Michigan. And, of course, the poor mayor, despite their groveling, and the poor city council are essentially now superfluous. They're going to be sent home. So the message, as we've heard it from Reverend Edward Pinckney of Benton Harbor, his town is already under a dictator, is that this is coming to you. If you can do it like this, there's got to be a moment where people fight back and they say no, And, of course, for that, you need a program. And that's where we come in. Here's the program we would specify, we would strongly suggest. First of all, and we're going to go through this, a lot of the debt in Detroit is based on credit default swaps. That's what's new about this. You'd normally say, well, it's a dictatorship in the name and the interest of the bondholders. True, but perhaps even more, it's a dictatorship in the name of derivatives counterparties. And these derivatives were sold under false pretenses. There's fraud. There's financial fraud. And we can tell you who committed it. It's financial fraud by certain Wall Street banks, as you can, of course, very well imagine. And they want to be paid now on their credit default swaps. We'll get the names of these banks in just a second. But the idea is clear, right, that there's hundreds of millions of dollars in very, very short-term money, which has to do with credit default swaps. Union Bank of Switzerland, UBS, Union Bank of Switzerland, Bank of America, BAC, and Merrill Lynch, JP Morgan. They started selling $3.7 billion worth of bonds back in 2005, and right now, they then also, at the same time they sold these bonds, they convinced the city of Detroit, and this is unfortunately Kwame Kilpatrick, who's now in the process of being sent to jail, and we have to look into exactly what role he played, but you can't conclude anything simply from a court judgment. The derivatives mongers were selling the city of Detroit credit default swaps, interest rate swaps and credit default swaps that were supposed to provide protection. And instead, it didn't work, and we've just had payments of $350 million owed on these derivatives alone, on these interest rate swaps, credit default swaps. Now, these are toxic instruments. This is what AIG used to bring down the world through the AIG London affiliate, right? The worst derivatives turned out to be credit default swaps and collateralized debt obligations. But these credit derivatives have to be banned, obviously. What you've got right now is a situation in the city of Detroit where you have no streetlights in many areas. You have no buses or public transportation. You have terrible streets full of potholes like the Verdun battlefield in World War I. You have millions of debt service being paid and millions being paid to derivatives counterparties, and you have practically non-existent police department, practically non-existent fire department. So this is now a spiral, and these interest rate swaps were sold with the express assurance that they would provide protection. So now one of the few sources of money of the city of Detroit are the gambling casinos that the city operates, and they're not going to be able to use that money for anything in the city. That money, the gambling casino money, is already being siphoned off to pay for the derivatives. So this is simply a surreal situation. So what would we need? My recommendation, first of all, the general platform to gather nationwide support, a 1% Wall Street sales tax with revenue sharing, so that some of that money is going to come down to the level of the city of Detroit, go through the Michigan government, prevent Snyder from stealing it and giving it to his rich friends, and then getting that as revenue sharing with the city of Detroit. Obviously, they need a debt moratorium. They need an unconditional freeze, halt on the payments of interest and principal for 5 years or for the duration of this depression, whichever lasts longer. And for the future of the United States and humanity, we need to ban credit default swaps and other credit derivatives. Ban them, outlaw them. And that means when they're banned, the existing ones get shredded. The existing ones get deleted. Now, we've been in touch in previous weeks with Reverend Pinckney, and we'll have him again soon. Let me just point out there is an organization here called Moratorium Now. It is the Coalition to Stop Foreclosures, Evictions, and Utility Shutoffs. Coalition fighting for a moratorium on all foreclosures while stopping foreclosures and evictions one at a time. Now, this looks like a fighting group. I just became aware of this now in the past few hours, looking for voices of resistance inside Michigan. So what they're doing is they're organizing community actions to try to block foreclosures, and they're doing it, with whatever means they have available. And one of their points, though, is for a moratorium on Detroit's public debt, make the banks pay. Now, that sounds like our language. Overturn emergency management for Detroit. Target the banks and corporations who are behind the financial ruin of the city. So this is a demand to halt the payment of debt service to the banks, build united mass actions to render emergency management ungovernable. Attend the Moratorium Now coalition meeting every Monday at 7 p.m. Near Wayne State University. You can look this up on their website. It's called DetroitDebtMoratorium.org, and I don't know much about them, just came across it, but these are the relevant points. Snyder had announced on March 1st that Detroit is facing a financial emergency, but did not identify who's responsible. He alleged that there's a $14 billion debt and future obligations, but not the predatory lending through subprime mortgages and municipal loan fraud, and I would say derivatives fraud. Snyder, along with the corporate media, is blaming the people of Detroit for their current plight, yet the situation in existence in the city is a direct result of racist and exploitative practices of the financial institutions and corporations. Over the last decade, 250,000 people have been forced out of the city due to home foreclosures, utility shutoffs, and the loss of jobs. A couple of more interesting paragraphs from this when we get back on World Crisis Radio. I'll read you a little bit more of this call for a moratorium on Detroit's public debt coming from the Make the Banks Pay. In particular, the role of derivatives always interests us, because this is one thing that should have been outlawed. If this had been outlawed when we said so, they'd have, $500 million to work with. The decline in population has taken hundreds of millions of dollars in tax revenue out of Detroit. It has devastated the school system, continued the flight of small business and social organizations. On top of this massive loss of employment and fraudulent mortgage lending, right, the bubble, the city government was forced into credit default swaps, CDS, and other questionable municipal loans, which have rendered the people into indebtedness that can never be paid off. The bond rating agencies, Moody's, Standard & Poor's, and Fitch, have continued to lower the creditworthiness of the city, driving up the interest rates and penalties so that the banks can now take all tax revenues and say that can be utilized for their debt service instead of municipal services and education. And I'm very glad we can be joined now very briefly, but certainly an important guest is our friend Reverend Edward Pinckney of Benton Harbor, whose town has been under this kind of financial dictatorship now for some months. Reverend, can you give us a report about what it looks like there in Michigan now that we have a dictator named for the city of Detroit?
Excuse me for a second, but I must say that, we are in big, big trouble here. They just appointed this guy named Kevyn Orr. He's from the law firm of Jones in Washington, D.C. He have already mentioned that is nothing in the city is not sellable. He said that he's coming in and reducing. See, here's the thing that a lot of people don't know. The state owes the city of Detroit millions and millions and millions of dollars. If they pay Detroit that amount of money, they would not be in this crisis today. And so everything was geared towards the takeover of the city of Detroit. See, Benton Harbor, when they came in, when they gave Benton Harbor the emergency manager here, they came in here to see how people would react. See, I had warned Detroit 3 years ago that they was going to receive an emergency manager. They kept saying, we're too big for them to allow an emergency manager to come in. But it's just the tip of the iceberg. This is going to go all across the nation. Remember this, they got 175 trained emergency managers to take over in this country today. Detroit, they, like I said before, they owe Detroit so much money that Detroit if they just paid Detroit the money, they wouldn't be in this bad position. But they want Detroit so bad they'll do anything.
Reverend, are you in touch with people who are mobilizing? Can you tell us anything about this group that's got the call for moratorium, the Detroit debt moratorium?
Oh, absolutely. Those are my friends.
Great.
Those are my good friends. Matter of fact, they have supported me for the last 10 years. And they are a tremendous group. And they have been fighting foreclosures, and they've been winning. Matter of fact, Vanessa Flukner and Jerry Goldberg came down here to help out the city of Benton Harbor and to neutralize the Benton Harbor St. Joe court system. And it is a tremendous group that really needs the support of everybody in this country because these foreclosures is going all across the country. And it's out of hand.
Their website points to California, Pennsylvania, Alabama, Rhode Island, and other states, and many cities, of course, facing something similar.
Oh, absolutely. And I tell you, they have really, really been fighting and winning. Right now, there's a lady in Jackson about to be evicted, and we're going up there to protect them. When they evict folks here in Michigan, we move them back in. That's what we do. When they put their furniture on the sidewalk, when they leave, we move the furniture back in. Then they got to go back to the court and have them evicted again. So it usually takes 6 months to a year after that. So that's one of the weapons that we've been using here, and absolutely, I've been working with that group for years and years. They have supported me, and tremendous friends, tremendous.
Now, Reverend, you're coming to Washington on April 3rd, am I right?
That I will be in Washington on April the 3rd. We'll be at 1156 15th Street Northwest, and then we're going to Planned Parenthood, and then I'm going to the Senate and the House. We'll be at 1156 15th Street. I'll be there at 9 a.m., but we're going to have a press conference at 10:30. And I want people to come so they can see, and it's all about the NAACP that day. We're going to make sure that they understand that we're serious. And that's another thing. You have not heard the NAACP speaking out about this. And unfortunately for what they did, after we got all the signatures, they wanted to be part of the NAACP wanted to be part of it after we received the signature so they can make the announcement and get the publicity.
Reverend, the Constitution says that every state has to have a Republican, small r, form of government, and the 14th Amendment says a state cannot deprive you of life, liberty, property without due process of law, and Obama is supposed to take care that the laws be faithfully enforced, and Holder is supposed to do that in detail. It seems to me you got a pretty good case here to lobby. When you come, we hope you have time to lobby the executive branch and maybe some people in Congress, and maybe some foreign media, right, to put this entire thing on the agenda worldwide, because this is creeping fascism now.
Oh, absolutely. And here's the thing. It's going all over the country. People don't understand. It's fascism right here. We're living it right here. In the city of Benton Harbor, we have a 27-year-old guy, they said. They corrected me when I told him he was 25. He looked 25. But he's about 27 years old. No experience running the city. yet he's running the city of Benton Harbor. Kevyn Orr, he has experience. He was a bankruptcy lawyer, attorney. So what he's doing, he's making $275,000 a year, coming in and with an expense account of another $200,000. Now that's almost $500,000 right there. It's going to be interesting. Nobody would believe what's happening here in the state of Michigan. Fascism is here.
It's a nightmare. Now, let me just ask, on this petition that I'm looking at on the on this website, they have a list of cities, and I'm just wondering, are all of these under emergency managers? So Benton Harbor, Flint, Highland Park, Inkster, Ecorse, Muskegon, are they all under emergency?
Yes, and Allen Park. Yes, and don't forget those, Muskegon. Yeah, they're all under the emergency manager. It's a total of 8 cities and 3 school districts.
8 cities and 3 school districts. Boy, that is amazing.
And it's spreading fast. I'm just letting people. I'm warning people right now. I know they don't believe it because Detroit didn't believe that they was going to get an emergency manager. I mean, they told me that they would never get one. The city was too big for them to put an emergency manager there. Now they got one. It's going all across the country. Those
Reverend, I think you got to think in terms of something like a press conference at the National Press Club to try to get. We got to focus some national and indeed world attention on this, and it just has to get done, right? The word has to get out. This is now. It's what you had in Germany before Hitler.
Let's do it. Let's and we need to call a press conference so the world can know about this.
Okay, now, Reverend, you got to come back next week. We'll still have time to organize for your visit to Washington. Okay, well, thank you very much, and we'll see you next week. So the reality in Detroit is already no streetlights, no buses, terrible streets full of potholes, millions of dollars a year for debt service and for the payments on credit default swaps, which should be illegal, sold by fraud by UBS, fraud by Bank of America, fraud by J.P. Morgan Chase, home of the London whale. And the debt, the commissions on this debt are unbelievable, right? You sell $3.7 billion of bonds, but the commissions are almost $500 million, right? It's about 1/7 of the total, 12, 13% or more, right? 15%, whatever it is, goes for the commissions. The banks promise to get you the money and say you can pay later. They get their fees up front, and then you find out that it doesn't work. So this is an absolute scandal, and it also shows the Obama administration, right? First of all, they should intervene. It used to be that racist governors were the problem. Now we have fascist governors like Snyder. Where's the Department of Justice? Where's the Obama administration? They've got to do something about this. This is a dictatorship now. And don't tell me about the Anglo-Saxon common law, as this character Orr did. Oh, it's a long tradition to send in a commissar to put the place in receivership. I'm sorry. This would be the biggest complete bankruptcy of a city, and the quicker they go into bankruptcy, the better it is, because that will stop the bleeding, right? File for protection from your creditors. That is the responsibility of Mayor Bing and the city council. They should do that. And remember, the reactionaries always say, contracts are sacred, except when they're labor contracts, right? Except when they're the contracts that these people want to break. So this is a big piece of U.S. civilization. Those are the factories that could lift the world that are now in the process of being destroyed. And the labor force that goes with the factories is in the process of being destroyed. And look at the general atmosphere in which it comes, right? This is now about a week after the killer cuts, the genocidal austerity of the sequester, right? We know that between 500,000 and 700,000 women seeking to get into the WIC, Women, Infants, Children program of nutritional supplements, proteins, vitamins for pregnant women, nursing women, and infants. That is being cut savagely. Everything is being cut. You name it, it's being cut. Head Start, cut. Unemployment benefits, cut. And all this presided over by the smiling face of Obama. So the issue of austerity retains and grows in centrality. Detroit is being crushed by usury. The United States crushed by usury. Europe crushed by usury. And in this atmosphere, we have no time for cultural populism of anybody's type. Now, to round out this atmosphere of surreal, grand guignol cruelty and unbelievable fascism, right? The stuff that you thought had been relegated to the fascist era is now springing forth from the tombs. The monsters are returning. One leading monster, of course, Congressman Ryan, with his budget plan. He wants to have Medicare voucherized, Social Security privatized, and old people euthanized. That's the outcome of it, right? The Cat Food Commission triumphs with this budget. And the amazing thing is when you listen to these liberal commentators, the Weekly Review on NPR, the Diana Rehm show, the fascists have become socially presentable. You can bring them into the salon. You can allow them to have their say. In the 50s or 60s, it would have been either you're absolutely a lunatic and you should be in the loony bin, or you're a Nazi and you should be in the dock at Nuremberg. But now, people professing those same ideas, the Rand Pauls, the Rubios, the Ted Cruzes, the Tea Party lunatics, these people are all supposedly socially presentable. So it's time to mobilize on these issues. As Reverend Pinckney says, he's coming on Washington on April 3rd, Baltimore April 4th. That's a protest primarily against the NAACP, but it's a protest against them for not doing anything. And I would hope that we can find ways for Reverend Pinckney to get a bigger international impact on this. The Michigan Loan Board is what tells this Kevyn Orr what he can do. So in the panic of 1837, way back there under Van Buren, and it's the fruits of Andrew Jackson's lunatic policy in destroying the Bank of the United States. The crisis for that came due a little bit after Jackson left the White House under Martin Van Buren. But you had a good 8, 9 states going bankrupt. It's not the end of the world. Some pretty big states, Pennsylvania, I think, was one of them, went bankrupt. And now you're going to have some cities going bankrupt. Let that be a lesson to these predatory merchants of derivatives. And again, the official Obama position is that there's nothing more that needs to be done in regard to financial reform. Obama will tell you, the Dodd-Frank law has taken care of that. Well, gosh, we've just had the testimony here of this charming lady from the London branch of J.P. Morgan Chase. It's Ina Drew, was dragged in front of a congressional committee in the last day or two, and she says, she never knew anything. The London whale was not her fault because she was not getting honest reports from the people on the scene, so she's not responsible. You put all these things together, the London whale and what's being done to Detroit and these other localities in Michigan, and you can see that Dodd-Frank solved absolutely nothing, and that this was a real insult to the American people to bring this law in and to say that solved anything. As far as I can see, it solved absolutely nothing. So here we are in the middle of this tremendous financial crisis. Now, in our second half, we're going to look in particular at the implications of the new papal election. Pope Francis I, Cardinal Jorge Mario Bergoglio of Buenos Aires, actually of Piedmont, of Turin, Italy. He's a dual national, Italian and Argentinian. He's got a European Union passport. I would just say, looking ahead to the results of our discussion here, make an appeal to the Pope. He's an enemy of the IMF. He's an enemy of usury and exploitation of this sort. The other thing we need to do, right, and as you mobilize for Detroit, get the Wall Street sales tax going. Now, we have a petition, Wall Street sales tax petition. If you want to sign the petition, this is one of these White House petitions, right? It's on the White House website, and if we get 100,000 signatures on it, that will entitle us to an answer from Obama. So here's what you do. Go to the topoftarpley.net. At the topoftarpley.net, it says, tell Obama to enact a 1% Wall Street sales tax. Click on that. Go sign the petition. Let's strike a blow for Detroit and for the survival of the world. And we'll be back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. In terms of activism, it's like this. For Detroit and for any place in similar straits, we need the 1% Wall Street sales tax that suppresses derivatives, speculation in general, provides revenue sharing to rebuild these places, and in particular to pay the salaries of municipal employees, teachers, firemen, policemen, repair people for the streets and so forth. 1% Wall Street sales tax. An immediate debt moratorium, a debt freeze, comprehensive freeze, halt on all payments of principal and interest for 5 years, all for the duration of the world economic crisis, whichever comes sooner. And that, of course, leads to a very significant haircut, right? An official cut. I think right now Detroit debt is going for 65 cents on the dollar. That's too much. It's got to go way down. The debt burden will eventually have to be cut down significantly. But you can't even talk about that now. That's when they get back on their feet. Not now. Right now, no payment for 5 years or the duration of the depression. And the third, we need to get back to work on banning credit default swaps. That's the root of this immediate cash emergency, sold under fraudulent pretenses, and Dodd-Frank, a bad joke. Ban credit default swaps, collateralized debt obligations, and structured investment vehicles. Now, on the Wall Street sales tax, to repeat it, go to Tarpley.net. At the top of Tarpley.net, you'll see a button that says, tell Obama to enact a 1% Wall Street sales tax. You should call it a Wall Street sales tax. It should be 1%, not some token thing, but real money for places like Detroit. We don't need to argue for this in the sense that nobody will notice. They should damn well notice, and they should change their behavior. So, top of Tarpley.net, tell Obama to enact a Wall Street sales tax. We got some other things going on. In addition to April 3rd, with Reverend Pinckney being in Washington, April 4th, Reverend Pinckney in Baltimore, we've also got some actions by the National Nurses Union. Yes, indeed. April 20th, here in Washington, D.C., over by the IMF and the World Bank at Murrow Park. Edward R. Murrow, the broadcaster. This is at Pennsylvania Avenue between 18th and 19th, so territory of the IMF, World Bank, and so forth. Go on over there. This is the Wall Street sales tax. Go with signs that say Wall Street sales tax and 1%. What they're there for is the Robin Hood tax at some tiny fraction of what is necessary, but fine. Go there with the full program. Wall Street sales tax, 1%. So that's what you need to do in terms of activism. The other thing we should just point to is the destabilizations unleashed by the Anglo-Americans against the modern state. This horrendous Beppe Grillo is lowering his mask, and the hideous fascist reality of Grillo is now becoming more and more evident. This is a deployment. This is the Bilderberg Group. This is Aspen Institute. This is Freemasonic. This is maybe, it's not the P2 Lodge anymore. Maybe this is the P3 Lodge that's in action with Grillo and Casaleggio. And in particular, this past week, we had an amazing event, a formal endorsement of Grillo by the Obama administration. If there was ever any doubt that Grillo was a tool of destabilization against Italy by the Anglo-Americans, well, that is over with. You'll remember in recent weeks, we had Goldman Sachs endorsing Grillo. This came from Jim Allen, the unspeakable financial parasite, hedge fund hyena, who had invented the term pigs. He's a great friend of Italy, great friend of Portugal, Italy, Greece, Ireland, Spain, loves them, calls them the pigs. So he's a well-wisher for Italy, and is, in that context, he endorsed Grillo at the same time that he was dumping Italian bonds and buying plenty of credit default swaps to increase the destructive power of his speculative hot money in attacking Italian state finances. But now we have the U.S. ambassador, David Thorne. And this is not just anybody. This is David Thorne, U.S. ambassador to Rome, and, of course, member of the infamous Skull and Bones death cult of Yale University, which brought you Hitler, at least helped to bring you Hitler through Prescott Bush, then helped to bring you the dropping of the atomic bomb through Colonel Stimson and Lovett in the Pentagon in those days, then the Vietnam War, also with the help of Averell Harriman of Skull and Bones. So now it's David Thorne of Skull and Bones in that embassy. And, of course, he's the former brother-in-law of Secretary of State John Forbes Kerry of Skull and Bones, and the former roommate, the Yale roommate of Skull and Bones, John Forbes Kerry. So what's the news from Thorne? Thorne spoke at a gathering of Italian high school students at the Liceo Visconti in Rome, and he said there are forces out there that are working for change that you should support, and among these is the five-star movement of Beppe Grillo. So there it is. Interference, outrageous interference, ham-handed, stupid, blatant interference in the internal affairs of a sovereign country by David Thorne in favor of the fabulous furry freak brother, Fat Freddy, alias Beppe Grillo, who wants to destroy all unions, wants to cut pensions, wants to block all infrastructure, and so on down the line. So if that's not clear, I don't know what is. Through the Casaleggio Associates, and the presence of one of their former members, Sassoon. We've had Bilderberg, Harvard Business Review, Aspen, and American Chamber of Commerce. Casaleggio also heavily Freemasonic, shows the Eye of Horus in some films that he's put out, comes from this Olivetti utopian information theory world. And then we've got Grillo, by the way, in the meantime, exposed as corrupt. Grillo is the owner. He's privatized the logo of the party, the Five-Star Movement. He owns that. And even though the Mickeys, the dupes who work for the movement think that they're operating under something called the non-statute or the non-rules of the party, there is a secret document where Grillo and his nephew are the owners. They own it. So this is a privatized political party. He says he's not a party. He's worse than a usual political party. In a usual political party, one person is not the owner, but in this case, there is. And Grillo, corrupt as all hell. 13 shadow corporations in Costa Rica with money changing going on for the benefit of Grillo. Now, today's the Ides of March. Beware the Ides of March. This is when we're recording, right? We're recording here on Friday the 15th of March. So the Italian parliament opens today, and there was an attempt made to elect the president of the Chamber of Deputies. This has failed, but what we're hoping for now is the first defections of the Grillini, unemployed novices who don't want a new election which may deprive them of their seats. Every man has his price, as Walpole said. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So the news from Rome is that today, the Ides of March, as the soothsayer says, watch out for the Ides of March. The attempt was made to elect a new president, a new speaker, probably we'd say, a speaker of the Chamber of Deputies, a speaker of the lower house of the parliament. And this has failed, in particular because the Grillo forces, the destabilizers, and many of these people are marginal dupes. They're clueless novices. They're people at the level of high school student government, if they're lucky. They've refused to vote for anybody, so there's no conclusion here. Now, however, the important thing is all of these deputies and senators have now been sworn in. Up until now, they had to act the part of cringing toadies to the fabulous furry freak brother, Beppe Grillo, who would scream. He would threaten them with being lynched on the Internet, in other words, subjected to immediate character assassination, personality assaults, and all the rest. Now, that's not so easy anymore because the Italian Constitution does not, repeat, not allow the party to control the seat. In other words, once a person has been elected, they then become part of the parliament, and if they change party, they take the seat with them. And with more infantile outbursts, tirades, fits from conniptions from Grillo, this becomes possible. And I'm particularly looking at an interesting editorial today, Il Giornale, right-wing paper, the editorial by Alessandro Sallusti, dated today, that the Social Democrat leader, Bersani, a colorless bureaucrat, as we know, he's the biggest party, though, in the Chamber of Deputies. He wants to buy a few Grillini. So the idea is, especially in the Senate, where these votes are needed, you could form a government if you could get a number of Grillini to turn their coats, to defect from the five-star lunatic asylum and go with the, in this case, the PD, the Democratic Party, Social Democratic Party, we would say, I guess. They're the old communists, of course, the old PCI. This is what they are. But we have, therefore, an attempt. Now, imagine, as he writes in this article, you're a newly elected Grillino senator. Up until a week or two ago, you were unemployed. You had no prospects in life. You were going nowhere. And then by using your spare time to work for Grillo, you're now a senator. The outcome of Grillo's tactic, and this was thought to be the strategy of Grillo Casaleggio the whole time, is to have a vote now and then another vote as soon as possible. In other words, prevent the formation of a government, block the parliament from functioning in any way. Notice this is a politician's strategy. The people who voted for Grillo have been signing petitions in large numbers saying, we want you to use the power you got now to do something for us immediately. Now, these poor people, again, clueless novices, whatever they are, they say things, they say a million different things. What they're really looking for, of course, is something like a guaranteed minimum income. Grillo is not the guy to turn to for a guaranteed minimum income because he is an enemy of production. He's an enemy of economic recovery. He hates infrastructure. Here in the United States, we know the score. FDR means WPA, Works Progress Administration, PWA, Public Works Administration, TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority. You want to get out of a depression, you build massive infrastructure. The more, the better. What we've just mentioned, this was even fell somewhat short, but it was the most that Roosevelt could get. The more infrastructure you build, the better off you are. Grillo blocks it all. No to all infrastructure. No Parma subway, no tunnel to allow the traffic to flow around Verona, no railroad between Turin and Lyon, France, no bridge over the Straits of Messina between Calabria and Sicily. No, 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 says the fabulous furry freak brother Grillo, right, with his fascistoid rhetoric of threats and strutting and posing and his unspeakable, scurrilous oratorical style. So you're one of these unemployed people, and Grillo is obviously, he's doing what helps Grillo. He thinks if he can have another vote now, he might be able to get the absolute majority, take over the country, and run it as a dictator with an enabling law, right? Fascist dictator Grillo running the country the way he's currently trying to run the Five-Star Movement, because the Five-Star Movement is no criticism of Grillo allowed. If you criticize him, you're expelled. And again, now his problem, Grillo's problem, is that 160 members of parliament are now members of parliament. They don't depend on him. They have independent incomes, and Grillo wants a lot of that money for himself, maybe so he can send it to his despicable shell corporations in Costa Rica or give it to his nepotistic nephew. So over the next couple of days, weeks, months, whatever it is, there's going to be a tremendous amount of enticement offered to these Grillini that are members of Parliament. And I am hoping that some of them will see the light, because any means to cut a fascistoid down to size is a legitimate means. You don't want this to go any further. And again, these clueless novices, these amateurs, amateur hour that we're seeing, they would be wise to ask themselves where their bread is buttered, because if the current parliament is dissolved, the typical thing of Grillo and Casaleggio would be to kick out all of the existing deputies and senators, out with all of them, and bring in a new levy of complete novices, complete inexperienced amateurs who would start from zero again, because the people now that are in the parliament, they have some experience. They learned something along the way, right, through the campaign and through coming to Rome and so forth. They've seen the big city. But Grillo would like them out and then replace them all. So that means if you stick with Grillo, you're going to lose your seat. The only way to keep your seat with Grillo's sabotage tactics and anti-institutional tactics the only way you can do that is to defect. Go over to one of the other parties, and you don't even have to do that. You can join the independent group in the Senate and continue to get your money for the next 4 or 5 years, depending on what happens. But certainly better than what Grillo is offering. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Now let's look at the new Pope and the results of the conclave. Go back and look at what I put up on Twitter, right? Webster G. Tarpley, back on March 12th in particular, and what I was hoping for from the conclave. I think first of all, we have avoided the worst. And the worst was this. You had a big international campaign to get an American cardinal in there. You had the American cardinals forming a group, holding press conferences, attempting to shape public opinion, to intimidate people. Big campaign by the New York Times to get an American cardinal in there. And again, this is just awful. We can't have this concentration of power, especially when we know that the empire here, the Wall Street and Washington, have policies which are evil, and they're incompatible with Christianity. That would have been the beginning of the end of the Vatican. Now, we can say the first thing is, thank God no American cardinal was elected pope. That would have been just awful. Let's give you 2 examples, right? One was the one that I mentioned before, right? Suppose we have Pope O'Malley, Cardinal of Boston, Sean O'Malley gets to be pope, and then Martin O'Malley, governor of Maryland, becomes the president of the United States by winning, which is perfectly feasible, right? And who knows what the future holds. So then we'd have Pope O'Malley and President O'Malley. That's just awful. Forget the separation of powers, forget checks and balances, forget the spiritual realm and the temporal realm. It would all become one obscene power cartel based on brutality, usury, aggression, and all the rest. Now, look, here's what else we also found out. The Roman press, the interesting website, Dagospia, I think it is, based on various Italian papers, they find that the principal advisor to Cardinal O'Malley of Boston is a guy called Terence Donilon, a clergyman, I believe. So Cardinal Sean O'Malley, papabile, he wanted to be pope from Boston, and his principal handler is Terence Donilon. Terence Donilon, the brother of the head of the National Security Council for Obama. Thomas Donilon is the political hack and thug who runs Obama's National Security Council, NSC, the security director, right? You know the job. He's following in the footsteps of Kissinger, Brzezinski, and the rest of them. So do you want to have a situation where the secretary or the cardinal secretary of state soon enough is Terence Donilon, and he calls up his brother Tom at the White House and finds out what should be done? The answer to that has to be no, no, no. That is a recipe for corruption and horrors. That would be a sign of the last days, I would say. So we didn't have that. Now, that was the biggest danger. And you can see the venom of the Anglo-Americans. We'll get into this in a minute. The venom of the Anglo-Americans is overwhelming. They can't stand this idea that they weren't able to get their way. Now, the other danger was a reformer oligarch. In other words, an oligarch operating under reform cover. We know what that looks like, right? We've seen it. So this would have been in the tradition of Carlo Maria Martini, the Cardinal of Milan, who died recently, so he was not a factor, but he would have been an oligarch, and he was in the previous conclave, oligarch operating as a reformer. Probably the biggest danger of that this time was the Cardinal of Vienna, Schönborn. Schönborn, oligarchical, feudal, aristocratic, noble family. The Schönborns, they're somehow intermarried with Tornontaxis. There's huge money, huge evil, power, and so forth mixed in there. So somebody like Schönborn would have appeared as an enemy of Bertone and Sodano and the others of the Curia. But, of course, he would have been an oligarch. So that was avoided. Now, as I put up here on the Internet, I suggested the best result would have been an Arab pope. We could have had the patriarch of the Maronites, right? Rai, R-A-I, would have been a fine pope. And this would have been an aggressive, forward-looking gesture saying, we want peace in the Middle East. Stop trampling on the Arabs, right? This goes for you Israelis, the U.S., the British and the French. Stop trampling on the Arabs. We want peace in the Middle East. We want a Palestinian state. And we want the defense of these Christian communities, right? The Maronites of Lebanon, the Melkites, the Syriacs of Iraq, of Syria, the Chaldeans of Iraq, and so on. So that would have been fine. So best result in Arab pope for Middle East peace. Italian or Latin American or French African, okay. But no American, no Anglophone, no Echelon, no Vienna. So what did we get? We got Latin American, and in the middle of that, in other occasions I tried to talk about it, better somebody from Argentina than from Brazil, because Argentina has a better and stronger anti-imperialist tradition. Now, this is what we have, and again, I am cautiously optimistic. I think I'm more than cautiously optimistic. I think this is the best thing that's happened since Syriza came on the scene. In other words, in terms of the worldwide struggle for charity and the good, we now have Pope Francis I, who it seems to me is largely to be considered as a positive force on these fronts. And again, the thing that it comes down to most of all is austerity, globalization, neoliberal economics, poverty, exclusion, and things like this. And on this, I think this is his trademark. And again, we can read from the venom of the Anglo-Americans and their rage and their foaming at the mouth. We can see the quality of what has been done here. First of all, just in terms of the country, Italian Pope Montini, right, the last one we had, Paul VI. This goes back to 1963. And then he died in 1978. An Italian pope is always going to have a certain amount of independence, and of course, this culture allows you to. You've got to have a certain degree of ability in the area of intrigue, because you're not starting from economic or military power. You have to live by your wits, and that, I think, in the case of Montini, was clear. A pope from Poland. What's the problem with Poland? The existential question for Poland is always the widespread hatred of Russia and therefore the desire to throw oneself into the arms of the United States. Now, Wojtyła certainly didn't do that, but that's the cultural tendency he had to fight. Now, he did stand up. Wojtyła, John Paul II, able to stand up to the U.S., told Bush to his face that what he was doing was very wrong. But after a while, I think this got worn down. The Pope we've just had from Germany, unfortunately, Germany is a similar story. A modern German is always going to be under the thumb of the U.S. to a greater or lesser extent, especially when he can be baited and attacked with this idea that he was a Nazi, that he helped with the flak to defend a city against bombing attacks, and so forth. But now, this is not Poland, this is not Germany. This is Argentina, and this makes all the difference in the world. This is now a strong, maybe the strongest anti-imperialist tradition, and includes all kinds of things, Perón, but also the debt moratorium and the conflict of the United States with the Kirchner and now Rodriguez-Kirchner governments. All of this is now working to the benefit of the world, and we'll be back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Let's try to cram in as much as we can now. When Bergoglio came out on the balcony for the first time, so he says, brothers and sisters, good evening. You know that the duty of the conclave was to provide a bishop for Rome, and it looks like my brother bishops went to the end of the world. They went to the end of the world. Now, this is an open to China. He's opening to China in his first speech. The quotation comes from the Jesuit father Matteo Ricci, the evangelizer of China, brought Christianity to China in the 1600s. Good enough to be a correspondent of Leibniz at the time. And immediately, Professor Filippo Mignini of the history of philosophy at the University of Macerata points this out, and it's in the Italian papers. So he says, I essentially want to have a positive relation with China in the same way that Ricci did when he was active at the Chinese court in Beijing back in the late 1600s, when he was also corresponding with Leibniz. The coronation, the equivalent to the coronation of the new pope, occurs on St. Joseph's Day. And I was amazed to hear the so-called commentators saying, oh, yeah, St. Joseph, he's the patron of the Universal Church. St. Joseph is a carpenter. This is Joseph of Mary, Joseph, and Jesus, right? This is the Holy Family. Joseph is a carpenter, and he's the patron saint of workers. Workers. Ever hear of workers? So the symbology is highly to the good. Opening to China, opening to workers. Now let's get to the heart of the matter. Maybe we can review some of the slanders, but not all. This is an anti-IMF pope. Here we go. This is the Spanish language, I think Argentinian, business publication called Ambito. And the headline, anti-liberal critic of the IMF and critic of foreign debt. He fought back against structural adjustment for Argentina in 2001. Structural adjustment means austerity. So he was against austerity in 2001, and he was against austerity in Europe in 2011 by Carlos Burgueño, that the new pope is anti-liberal. He's against neoliberal economics. He's a harsh critic of the International Monetary Fund. He's against structural adjustment, austerity. He defends the right of debt restructuring. Debt restructuring is a debt moratorium. That is what Detroit needs. Jorge Bergoglio, Francis I, never fled from economic conflict. He's an expert in the social doctrine of the church, the social gospel, right? The preferential option in favor of the poor. He fought austerity in 2001. He fought it in Europe in 2011. He took an active stance against liberal policies. Back in those days, in the early '80s, the president of Argentina, Fernando de la Rua, would come into his cathedral, and Bergoglio would let him have it in the homily, in the sermon, in the Mass on Sunday. We got to have more done to help the poor. August 2001, document of the Bishops' Conference of Argentina. The church takes a strong position, saying some of the most serious social ills we suffer, economic and political reflection, these are based on the crudest liberalism. The crudest liberalism. The state, the nation state, should be an instrument created to serve the common good, to be the guarantor of equity and solidarity of the social fabric. And that meant, according to Bergoglio, you've got to have a social safety net. And you've got to fight two maladies. One is tax evasion, and it means by the rich, and the squandering of state funds, which are the money of the people. He's in favor of the right to strike, but he wants it to be used moderately. In some countries where the union movement is strong, you can imagine an overreaching in strike demands. I mean, that's virtually unimaginable in the U.S. or Europe today. The document of the Argentinian bishops written by Bergoglio condemns the external debt that increases every day and makes it difficult for us to grow. And he has come back to this debt question repeatedly. He wants restructuring, debt moratorium or partial. This was also in the case of 2005. He joined with Ghana Cardinal Turkson of the Pontifical Council of Peace and Justice in October 2011 for what this paper calls a harsh criticism from the Vatican of adjustment policies, austerity, that are beginning to be applied in European countries because of the financial crisis. He repeated in this 2011, he takes sentences out of the 2001 Argentine document. The International Monetary Fund has lost its ability to ensure global financial stability. The new World Central Bank has to be based on spirituality and ethics. Bergoglio says, economic liberalism without rules and controls is one of the causes of the current economic crisis. We cannot have fundamentally speculative financial markets. Those are damaging to the real economy, especially in weak countries. He's close, according to this writer, he's close to the indignados, but not screaming, but with calm reasoning. He's also not like Grillo. By the way, Grillo, compared to Bergoglio, is cutting a wretched, pitiful figure with his screaming and posturing. Now we have some more. El País of Spain goes back to October 2009. Cardinal Jorge Bergoglio yesterday criticized the Argentine government for failing to prevent the rise of poverty in the country. This is immoral, unjust, and illegitimate, he said, because it's taking place in a nation that has the conditions to avoid or correct the damage. Instead, it seems that Argentina has chosen to exacerbate the inequalities, said Bergoglio of Buenos Aires. Human rights are being violated not only by terrorism, repression, and murder, but also by unjust economic structures that cause great inequality. So official poverty in Argentina was at 15%. Cristina Fernandez had to concede that it was really more like 23%. He said, look, we have to watch out on the social debt, the negative, right, the side of what's going on here in the Argentine economy. 2009, Bergoglio protested against extreme poverty. Unjust economic structures give rise to great inequality. Social debt is immoral, unjust, and illegitimate. Poor people are persecuted for demanding work. Rich people are applauded for fleeing from justice. Okay, you get the idea. This is a really good thing. And, of course, the venom coming from Michael Moore, posting something about alleging that he was the chaplain of the military junta. He's not a plutocrat. He's not for globalization. And he's not afraid. This is important, too. Not afraid. The day after his election, he had to go over to Via della Scrofa, to one of these residences that are there, which some of us can remember from earlier decades. But it's either Via della Scrofa 50 or 70, the House of the Clergy. So he had to go to pay his bill, and he took one car, no motorcade, one police car of the Vatican gendarme. He drove over to get his bag and to pay his bill. This is the opposite of what we saw in Rome in July of 2011 when the place was practically fortified. You could see that Ratzinger was afraid. All those American cardinals had convinced him that there were dark forces of the Islamic world out to get him. This Pope doesn't care. He rides the subway. He rides the bus. He lives in his own apartment. He doesn't live in a fortress. He's not afraid. Tremendous step forward. So we've got the embarrassment of Hannity, O'Reilly, and Limbaugh. Normally they'd celebrate this. They're completely freaked out, but it's in silence because this guy cares about the poor, and they don't. And they claim to be Christians, and they're not. They have no idea of charity, no idea of social doctrine, no idea of these other positive things. We'll have more about this in the coming weeks. But the British already hate Francis. He's also in favor of the freedom of the Malvinas from British occupation, the so-called Falkland Islands. We'll be back next week, but this was a good